Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello, this is Kim Howerton with Keto Life Support, and this is episode 205. Reports from CoSci, which is a conference that Dave Feldman put on in Las Vegas in March of 2024. So I'm actually still in Las Vegas as I record this, and I want to talk a little bit about the CoSci conference, which sort of sounds like cozy. It was not especially cozy. The room was fine. It was not very warm in Las Vegas this weekend, which is what I expect from Vegas, so shame on you. It was a little bit rainy, and that was sad. But the conference itself was delightful. And the point of this conference was really, yes, to talk about lipids and related topics, but to really focus on the community aspect of citizen scientists, bringing together citizen scientists, N equals 1, and researchers on related topics to really talk about where we can get the industry of, well, is it an industry? It's not really an industry. The field of lipid research to go, because, I think we might, maybe, hopefully, all agree that one of the issues with anything that is any academic or business-based community can get a little bit stuck in thought patterns, right? There's confirmation bias. And the lipid hypothesis is that basically, in a nutshell, that LDL specifically, and if not LDL, sort of related to appropriate cholesterol markers, those are causal in nature, that having high lipids. I'm going to back up for a second. So there are, generally speaking, LDL, which is LDL-C, LDL cholesterol, and VLDL, very low density, IDL, LP(a). Those are all under the umbrella of an ApoB100 type of cholesterol, whereas an HDL is considered a ApoA type, right? So I'm talking specifically about the ApoB types are considered atherogenic, right? They are causal in nature. The higher your ApoB type cholesterol, the more at risk you are, right? And so that's the lipid hypothesis, at risk of cardiovascular disease, I should say. And so that is sort of the consensus in the cardiovascular community, the doctors, the researchers, academia. That is the prevailing theory of one of the factors. No, and I don't know anybody that would say it's the only, well, they might act like it's the only causal factor, but epidemiology shows us pretty clearly that they are one of many risk factors for cardiovascular disease. However, traditional news reports would have you believe they're the primary one. And even research that believes in the lipid hypothesis that high cholesterol is one of the causal factors of heart disease would not ever say it's the only one. But you'd be forgiven for believing it's the primary one based on where the attention is put in research, where dollars are put in research, where reports are made, where headlines are written. But, there's the reality and then there's the perception, right? But this conference was sort of focused around, or not focused, but included the idea that a lot of people in the low carb community are questioning this hypothesis and actually kind of pulling back to a hypothesis that got drowned out when the lipid hypothesis came to prominence in the 80s. And the earlier hypothesis or a competing, I don't think it should be competing, but a different hypothesis was the response to injury hypothesis. I'm giving you all sorts of background right now, but hopefully this will be helpful. So this response to injury hypothesis was that, our arteries are this part is true, it's not a hypothesis, but our arteries are lined with this endothelial lining that has little, like, you can think of them as little fingers, sort of like your lungs are lined with these little fingers, these little protective fingers that are the lining of your arteries, and they help keep your arteries healthy and clean and clear, and they deal with any issues. But that over time, with insults to your endothelium, like smoking, chronic high blood pressure, inflammation, many things can cause that inflammation, but these things come together and they damage that lining. And when the lining gets damaged, then it becomes vulnerable to injury. And then LDL might be part of the attempt to heal that injury. And so we've got sort of these two differing things, neither of which disagrees with the fact that it is the cholesterol itself that collects, plus some other byproducts that might collect in the arteries and eventually, given enough time and enough collection, cause that blockage. So, they can go in, they can look at the blockage and they see what it's made of, and it's got cholesterol in there, right? It's got these cholesterol bits. But what caused that, where the lipid hypothesis say it's just given enough time and enough stuff, it collects. And the injury hypothesis says it only collects because there's damage, and it's collecting in the dam. It's like a pothole, and these things are coming in and filling the pothole. There's also some middle ground, right, that we might find. And this is just a reality. If you had zero LDL, if you had zero ApoB type particles, I should say, there'd be nothing to collect in the little holes. This is given the injury hypothesis. So even the injury hypothesis says, well, yes, the ApoB type particles are what's causing the little blockages. And so, if you didn't have anything to fill, you would have no blockages, sure, but you'd also be dead because you need some of these ApoB type particles. We need cholesterol. If you don't have cholesterol, you end up without any cells, and that seems ill-advised. And you also wouldn't make any sex hormones and so on and so forth. So ApoB type particles are the transport of cholesterol, and you can't just have HDL, you have to have some LDL. And so you can't have no LDL, right? So the big argument is, well, we can't eliminate it. Now, the lipid hypothesis people would say, you've got to get it as low as you possibly can survivably get it, and that's going to help reduce your risk. Whereas the response to injury people might say, well, you need to stay real healthy and have very low inflammation and don't cause any potholes. And that's going to be your best chance of staying healthy, right? And how did this all come to a head? Because I think you could probably say, prior to the invention of the lean mass hyperresponder, which I'll get to, you could have said, well, let's just do both. Let's cover our bases. Let's aim for very low inflammation. Let's aim for keeping our arteries as healthy as possible. And let's do what we can to try and keep that LDL-C because at the time the discussion was really about LDL-C, or the ApoB, kind of in a quote unquote good range under a certain number that seems to change all the time. Anyway, but what we found is in the low carb community, especially in the keto community, especially with lean mass hyperresponders, that the diet that best keeps them healthy is one that raises their ApoB type particles, or maybe just their LDL-C particles, which are one of the ApoB types. And it seems like we're still stuck on looking at LDL-C instead of all of ApoBs. These things change from year to year. And so those people are in a conundrum, right? Because they're like, look, for me to do A, I have to do B. And when I do B, I get high cholesterol. And so the diet that keeps them healthy is also the diet that raises their lipid markers in a way that makes their cardiologist freak out. I was going to use a bad word there, but I'm not going to do it. So that's a bit of a problem for these people. And that is this kind of the root of where CoSci, this conference, but more Dave Feldman's research into lean mass hyperresponders came to prominence and is now sort of a big movement, at least in a small pond, and something that a lot of people are really getting behind because it really questions the lipid hypothesis that LDL-C, or maybe you could say ApoB containing particles, are causal in nature. Now, some might say they might be partially causal in nature, but in all circumstances, are they? I mean, that's a question we're trying to answer. So that's the background for this conference. So at this conference, we learned more about, I should say, Dave Feldman's, the Citizen Scientist Foundation's look into lean mass hyperresponders. Now, lean mass hyperresponders are people that went keto and found they hyper responded. What does that mean? They had very high LDL-C in response to eating a ketogenic diet, while they had high HDL, which is generally protective, and very low triglycerides, which is also thought to be a very good thing in terms of cardiovascular disease risk. And the leaner these people got, they often found the higher their LDL-C went. Not everyone is a hyper responder. I'm not. Not that I'm super lean, but over the course of losing 100 pounds, my LDL really hasn't gone up much at all. But even when I ate a very high carb diet, my HDL was still like above 70. So for some of us, we have lipids that are not especially, I would say, mobile. Now, if I got down to a BMI of 22, who knows? I might see the LDL go through the roof. I don't think that's especially likely given how hard I have to fight to keep it simply under 25. So we all have different genetics, right? And that might play a role as well. But what is interesting is based on, the research around lipids, it was thought that almost no one could get their LDL up above 300 or even maybe 200 was super rare unless they had a condition called FH, familial hypercholesterolemia, which are people that have lifelong high LDL-C. LDL-C is what most people just call LDL, and so those can be used synonymously, but technically it's LDL-C, in case you are confused why I sometimes call it one and the other. But what they found is now there's this group of people that go on ketogenic diets, had fairly normal HDL-C, and then on a ketogenic diet, it might shoot through the roof. And what does that mean? Does that suddenly mean they've increased their cardiovascular risk? And the lean mass hyperresponder sort of are questioning. There's no definitive statement on that. But what the research is doing, what the study is doing, is following these lean mass hyperresponders over, I believe, 2 years. I think they're probably hoping to follow them longer, but the initial term is 2 years, getting regular CAC scans. That's a coronary artery calcium scan, because when plaque is laid down in your arteries, as it hardens, it becomes calcified, is what they'd say. And then that can be picked up in a calcium scan. Hardened plaque arteries will cause atherosclerosis and will, over time, increase your risk of a heart attack, a blockage, right? Whereas soft plaque actually increases your risk of strokes. That's the new baby plaque, right? Newer plaque is soft, and over time it becomes hardened. So the lean mass hyperresponder study is looking at this calcium score to see if it's getting worse. And, they turned in their preliminary results, and they found that most of the people that they were looking at, their initial scores were 0 or close to, meaning they were not starting with much plaque, even though at the time they'd had spent somewhere between 1+ years, and in some cases more, in many cases more years, at LDL levels that are just through the roof. So they're going to be watching these people and see if they're forming plaque at a faster or slower rate than people without these crazy numbers, to do a comparison, because it may very well be contextual about whether or not LDL-C has any causal implications. That was kind of the central question. And we heard from people like Nadir Ali, Bill Cromwell, Matt Budoff, different doctors, Brett Scher, cardiologists, looking into what's going on here about the research. And then there were a lot of people who came and talked about their own experience being a lean mass hyperresponder, or dealing with something about their health that brought up for them the heart disease risks, surviving a heart attack, dealing with different relationships within your family. So we also heard from David Diamond on what does the research actually say about risk factors. So overall, it was a great weekend. I'm just kind of giving you an overview of the topics and really encouraging everyone to look into the research. So that's cholesterolcode.com is where you can find Dave and Siobhan Huggins, who's kind of his right-hand woman, talking about these numbers and these results and what's happening there. And if this is of interest to you, the foundation, the Citizen Science Foundation, is entirely financed by contributions. They don't take any industry funding. They are from donations and from people buying their own labs at a company called Own Your Labs, OWNYOUR LABS, ownyourlabs.com, where you can go if you want to get blood tests done that your doctor won't order for you and you want to order them yourself. You can go there and order your own labs at Own Your Labs. Any profits, which is almost everything that they make, they have to pay for some credit card fees and they have to pay for the test, but any profits will go to the Citizen Science Foundation as well. And you can donate your results. You can check a box and get 10% off at Own Your Labs. If you say, yes, you can use my data. Now they anonymize it, so it's not in a way attached to you anymore. Nobody could find you based on your data, but that then can go into their pool of research as well. So this is a little bit of a plug for the Citizen Science Foundation, which I think is super important that we start to be able to build in this world. And over time, I hope that it grows and is able to fund many, many more studies over time. So that was my little conference recap. I hope there's another one next year and more people can come and we can talk about more studies and more things. And just so you know, I'm not going in depth into these specific talks so much because they're all going to be available online. Now, I don't have the link yet. I don't know that we know the link yet, but it will probably be on Dave Feldman's YouTube channel. And if not, it will be announced on Dave Feldman's channels where you can watch them. And I'll do my best to keep you guys updated in the future about where you can watch them. But that was the CoSci, CoSci. I think that was collaborative science, was what CoSci was for. .org, CoSci.org was the website. And I'm sure you can find out more information there. So take care, guys, and I will talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.